if we just look at another thing in his past, in 1994, and it's in this book by Daniel Esterlin, there's actually an email that Assange wrote to a NASA employee called Fred Blonder, and it was also copied in to somebody at Los Alamos Laboratories. And at the time of Assange's email, Fred Blonder was working on a cybersecurity program called the NASA Automated Systems Incident Response Capability. So it looks as though Assange was assisting in some way, whether that be in an open source way. I can't imagine it was in a true open source fashion if he's working for NASA and Los Alamos Labs, but he was in the, I mean, I'll not read it out, it's a bit geekish, the email,
yes, yeah.
But it's to do with cybersecurity or program security, right?
Okay.
So now there's another person, let's just read this, called Peter Zatko. Now, Peter Zatko started working for DARPA, I think, in 2010. So DARPA is the Defense
Advanced Research Projects Association,
who were involved in a very early version of the internet.
That's right.
So they developed computer and other cyber-related technologies to do with connected to defense. So I'm just going to read this out. So there's a computer club in Germany called the Chaos Computer Club, which would have conferences. I was in Germany for Chaos Congress in 2009, a hacker conference. And after attending a series of talks, I was headed back to my hotel when I spotted Julian Assange. This predated my working as a project manager at DARPA, as a hacker in residence, if you will. So he was employed by DARPA because he was a hacker the following year after he's at this computer conference, this guy, Peter Zatko. It was also before WikiLeaks released the video Collateral Murder, which we'll come on to, and hundreds of thousands of diplomatic cables, the Swedish rape allegations, and Julian ending up a virtual prisoner holed up in Ecuador's diplomatic mission. So in other words, what he's saying is, Julian Assange was kind of okay when I spoke to him at this point, yeah? So he's trying to, what he's insinuating there is, I would never have spoken to him if I'd known he was going to do all that. So given that I hadn't seen Julian in more than a decade, so he knew Julian Assange in 1999, I greeted him and we agreed to grab some dinner and a catch-up. After reminiscing about the old gang, he and I had been part of the same hacker milieu, as Julian would say. I asked why he had skipped out on the hacking scene to form WikiLeaks. Last I heard, Julian had left to study mathematics and physics at the University of Melbourne. He was working on a duress-based crypto file system, also known as the rubber hose file system. So that would be, I think, in 1997.
Okay.
Right? So he's gone. If he has gone to Melbourne University to study mathematics and physics, then he's gone there a little bit late. Because if he was born in 1974, 84, 94...
He was only 25 in 99, so it's a mature student sort of getting to...
Julian told me his graduate work had been funded by a US government grant, specifically NSA and DARPA money, which was supposed to be used for fundamental security research. It was a time when the Bush administration and Department of Defense were seen to be classifying a great deal of fundamental research and pulling back on university funds. So it's possibly got links to the NSA at that point. From 99 onwards up to 2006, I can't see what he was doing.
Right.
But he's had possible ties to NASA, Los Alamos, and the NSA in the mid to late 90s. So here you have a non-US citizen at a foreign university doing graduate work studies, and the United States government came barreling in and not only snuffed out the funding and killed his studies, it also barred him from knowing what it was he had been funded to research. So you see, depending on who you ask, the US government actually helped create WikiLeaks, and the rest, as they say, is history. So, yeah.
Some very dodgy connections there, by the sounds of it. If that seems to fit with everything else we're going to discuss at some level fairly closely.
Okay. So we come now to the launch of WikiLeaks, which was in December 2006, and something which really raises alarm bells for me is that the Washington Post and Time magazine, they wrote articles about WikiLeaks, so promoting WikiLeaks effectively, telling us what was to come. Before any significant leaks had come out, they're bigging up this organisation in the mainstream press. Now, if you're a new media organisation, which is what WikiLeaks are, new online newspaper, or whatever it might be, normally you would have to build up a customer base by spending money on advertising or promotion in some way or other. So do you want to just comment on that, Andrew?
Well, absolutely. I mean, you quite rightly made the analogy with an organisation perhaps like UK Column or Rich Planet itself, in that you need to make people aware of what you are doing. So you have to have a way of doing that, and one way is to start a regular update service. And maybe then Facebook wasn't as prominent as it is now and everything, but you could still. I think Google AdWords was sort of in operation by that sort of time. But anyway, however you do it, you're going to need to build up a regular updates and maybe have an RSS feed on your site so that you can feed updates to that. People can subscribe to that feed and get the updates. But
unless you've got the mainstream media doing it for you.
Unless you've got the mainstream media doing it for you, which, as you rightly pointed out, seemed to be the way that WikiLeaks immediately started to operate.
Right. So before they've even gained any sort of reputation or credibility whatsoever, they're bigging up WikiLeaks, right? And but after that point, by March 2007, they'd allegedly leaked 1 million documents within 3 months of starting.
And that's a lot of documents.
Yeah. But how did anyone know about WikiLeaks to give them the million?
Those million documents. Yeah. Documents. Where did those 1 million documents come from? That's who has access to 1 million documents to leak.
And we are going to come on to people who've commented on that, such as John Young, in a moment.
Right.
So throughout the WikiLeaks life, as we've said, it's had help from mainstream media. And the main publications have been the New York Times in the US, the Guardian in the UK, and Der Spiegel in America, and also The Economist. I mean, these are just establishment arse-licking organisations that are they're not guardians of truth. They're architects of disinformation.
Right, and I mean, I didn't really investigate WikiLeaks much at all. I had no interest in it and I think it was primarily because we're going to talk about Julian Assange's comment about 9/11, aren't we? And by the time that WikiLeaks came out, I already knew about 9/11, and therefore, to me, the WikiLeaks should be leaking information about 9/11, but it never has. But what was interesting was, I think in a previous conversation I had with you, or in similar conversations I had with other people, I felt that what they were doing with WikiLeaks, and it was essentially a psychological operation, and I felt that it was changing the way that they were going to get people to perceive the news and where the news stories came from. In other words, it was going to come out of a secretive organisation where you couldn't really get the name of the person that gave you the story because, and interestingly, you mentioned The Guardian a minute ago. When I was reading up, when we'd agreed to do this discussion, I found an article from 2010 from the Guardian, and it actually says at the top, and I never read this before a few days ago, Julian Assange, the whistleblower, Julian Assange, founder of WikiLeaks, may just represent the future of news reporting, but he's not a journalist. So that was exactly what I thought. In other words, The Guardian seemed to be admitting to me, as I read it, that WikiLeaks was a psychological operation.
So they know that they're losing out in print media and TV media. People are getting more and more information from the internet. So someone is going to define how that's going to work.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. So you mentioned 9/11. So let's give the Julian Assange's quote on 9/11. So I'm just going to read it from this book. So the Belfast Telegraph interviewed Julian Assange on July the 19th. I'm not sure what year that was, but he stated, "Any time people with power plan in secret, they are conducting a conspiracy." So there are conspiracies everywhere. There are also crazed conspiracy theories. It's important not to confuse these two. So the interviewer then asks him, what about 9/11? I'm constantly annoyed that people are distracted by false conspiracies, such as 9/11, when all around we provide evidence of real conspiracies for war or mass financial fraud. Very non-specific.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What about the Bilderberg conference, the interviewer asks? That is vaguely conspiratorial in a networking sense, Assange claims. We have published their meeting notes, and as have other people published their meeting notes. So, to suggest that there was no conspiracy involved in 9/11, what planet is he living on?
Right.
And who is he really working for?
Right. I mean, if he is clearly an intelligent person, despite whatever background he may have had. If you listen to the interviews, he's quite articulate, and he does understand how politics operates, and he even more or less says that the two-party system in the US is a joke. He doesn't put it in those terms, but if you listen to the whole interviews, he knows that is is just another puppet show, really. So why doesn't he go the whole hog, so to speak?
Mm-hmm. I mean, you mentioned there about him being politically aware. You read in some of his emails where he talks about the importance of language and using certain words and certain phraseology in order to influence lots of people. So he'll say, well, we don't use the word hacking, we put the word ethical before it, or ethical leaking. Leaking can have a negative connotation. Ethical leaking changes it. So Dr. Judy Wood has spoken about this in very careful use of language. And as you say, when he's interviewed, he's never in a hurry or pressed for an answer, and he always considers his words just like a politician. So how did he become so proficient, sounding like a politician with this computer hacking background?
14 pages about this topic. Also concurrently in Der Spiegel, 17 pages. The New York Times, I'm not sure how many, International Herald Tribune, and I believe the Telegraph also has it on the front page, and I haven't checked into the others.
What do you say when people like the White House accuse you of compromising the security of troops in Afghanistan by virtue of this massive leak?
Yeah. We're familiar with groups whose abuse we expose, attempting to criticize the messenger to distract from the power of the message. And we don't see any difference in the White House's response to this case to the other groups that we have exposed.
Can you then therefore answer the question that's been asked twice already by a journalist? You mentioned the word crimes. Can you please just be a bit more specific about what you meant by are these crimes committed within these documents? Because unless the question's answered, how do you expect the media to take you seriously down the line when there are potentially more good stories to come out?
What is your specific question?
You mentioned a while ago war crimes or crimes when you were talking about the documents. You weren't specific. What I'm asking you is to be more specific when you talk about war crimes, or crimes is I think the word you used.
I think I was speaking about the issue in general. However, it is up to a court to decide clearly whether something is in the end a crime. That said, prima facie, there does appear to be evidence of war crimes in this material. An example is the Task Force 373 HIMARS missile strike on a house which killed 7 children.
You find an average computer hacker, right? They don't speak like that. They're not so well trained in this art of political speaking.
Political discourse,
Yeah,
that's right.
yeah.
Yeah.
So where's he been trained on that? And
Yeah, it's a
to
good
be
question.
able to hold his own in these, not that he's actually ever taken part in a proper critical interview. We'll mention the interviews he has taken part in. And I've just made a few notes here from something that I was listening to on the internet, that the leaks on the whole have not damaged the imperialist agenda that the US is running in their war campaigns,
No.
but it has helped to let's say, discredit Iran or reveal alleged Iran's nuclear program. There's been nothing on any sort of Israeli nuclear program or crimes. It's helped destabilize Pakistan. And one of the things that the leaks have done is, okay, it's revealed certain groups in Pakistan and Afghanistan as operating terrorist groups, but it's not found any link to U.S. intelligence agencies, or the fact that U.S. intelligence agencies are controlling, let's say, the Pakistani intelligence agency and this kind of thing. So it's very one-sided disclosures. It
is,
seems.
and in fact, we're going to talk about the John Pilger interview, but that actually comes out in the Pilger interview. I know that's one of the notes that I made when I was listening to that. That Assange basically blames the formation of those, ISIL and ISIS groups on the Saudis. That's essentially what he does in that interview. So it's not really any different from what the US State Department itself has essentially been trying to do. You made this point, and it's horrible to kind of think about, but I think it is worth mentioning the video which really put WikiLeaks right at the forefront of everybody's minds was this where people were killed by this helicopter gunship shooting and missile attack, wasn't it? And you made this point about the way that's like having the horrible sort of head on a pole type thing, and I think it's worth you mentioning that.
Yeah, I'll just mention that. It was an analogy that I drew.
Yeah.
WikiLeaks released these videos. I'm not sure if they came through Bradley Manning. I think they may have done.
Yes, I think they did come through him, didn't they? Yes.
Where you've got you can hear the voice of the helicopter pilot, and there's a whole load of people on the ground, and they're defenseless, and they're basically mowed down. They're just killed in total cold blood. It's sick. It's just sick. And WikiLeaks leaks this. But if it hadn't been leaked by WikiLeaks, then mainstream media, has it been shown on mainstream media? I think it has.
I think it has, but
that gave them license to show it, because they weren't releasing it. They were just commenting on the fact that WikiLeaks have released it. So it's okay to now show this. And I made the analogy of, we've got an empire, the US empire, stroke Israeli empire. We've had empires in the past of total dictatorships where if someone steps out of line, you will get your head chopped off. Not only that, we'll stick it on a pole so everyone can see your head so that no one else acts in this way. Right? So it's using fear.
Yeah.
Does releasing those videos particularly damage the US agenda? Because it not necessarily.
No. I mean, it's showing that they can act with impunity, and any nation that wants to go up against them can expect that sort of treatment, where they'll just go in and kill civilians, unarmed civilians, with impunity.
Yeah. It shows that international law doesn't apply to them.
Right.
So that's quite a scary thought.
Yeah.
And so is it really being released for this sort of open freedom of information reasons in order to prevent war? Because as far as I'm aware, I'm not sure how much Assange speaks about being anti-war. We need to stop all wars, like Nick Hollerstrom
does. That's right. I've
not heard him speak in those terms.
No, and we hear of many stories of atrocities, from people that have come back from war zones. But this was an actual time when it was actually blasted across the screens for everyone to see, an atrocity. So the way that then the global population perceives those atrocities has been altered.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let's take an example of a real whistleblower, Mordechai Vanunu, who found out about Israel's secret nuclear program, and he ended up in prison for 18 years, and most of you probably never heard about him. That's what happens to real whistleblowers. Right? You don't end up on the front page of the Sun, the Times, and the Guardian simultaneously.
Yeah.
Because those who orchestrate cover-ups in the intelligence, they've got all their tentacles in the mainstream media.
And of course, going back to that video, Bradley Manning was prosecuted, wasn't he? I can't remember what happened to him. But then again, so if we're starting to shift the view of what WikiLeaks actually is from what the mainstream says to what we think it is. It's a way of presenting information to the public, which is, It's different to mainstream media.
It appears that it's possibly globalists that are behind the setting up of it and the sponsoring of it. Perhaps we can mention John Young, who 10 years before WikiLeaks was set up, was running a site called cryptome.org, which itself was leaking documents. Is that right, Andrew?
That's right, yes, it was indeed. And I came across quite a few links to this because, and this is where we sort of start to get a little bit into the Iceland connection. There was an initiative to try and set up a haven in Iceland. And I think John Young, who runs cryptome.org, which to me, when I looked at it, is kind of a more honest version of WikiLeaks, because when you get onto this idea of funding, Assange was asking for like $250,000 or $500,000 funding, and John Young, who was running cryptome.org and was involved with Assange for a while, he says, "Well, hang on, why are you needing this sort of money? We don't need that sort of money to run a web server. You know, if you've got $10,000 a year, you can run a pretty decent web service for that, you know, with quite a lot of security and so forth." So, and there was quite a lot of discussion at that time, because I know that this Icelandic MP, Birgitta Jónsdóttir, she was involved with trying to get Assange and WikiLeaks a base in Iceland, and I think she came under fire for that as well, and that all went a bit wrong. And you can read about that on cryptome.org, and I think some of that is in the data. It's mentioned a little bit in Esterlin's book, isn't it? So,
yeah. There's several quotes from John Young in this book, Deconstructing WikiLeaks. So John Young was actually invited at the start of WikiLeaks to be on the board, but very soon after he claimed that WikiLeaks is a fraud and they're working for the enemy. And he's made, as you say, he's made comments about the funding. I'll read out perhaps a few more quotes. So this is what Young has said. Announcing a $5 million fundraising goal by July will kill this effort. It makes WikiLeaks appear to be a Wall Street scam. This amount could not be needed so soon except for suspect purposes. I'd say the same about the alleged 1.1 million documents ready for leaking. Right? So he's saying the fact that they've got so many documents straight away makes it look like a scam. Way too many to be believable without evidence. I don't believe the number. So far, one document of highly suspect provenance. And then he says here, well, it only came up in the topic of raising $5 million the first year. That was the first red flag that I heard about. I thought that they were actually a public interest group up until then. But as soon as I heard that, I knew that they were a criminal organisation. Right? So pretty strong claims there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And let me just mention a few other people who, because WikiLeaks, when it was set up, it did publish the board members, the people involved, the group involved. But apparently it doesn't now. The board members are kept secret, as are the finances kept secret.
Yeah, that was one of the things in the emails. They wanted to get public accounts. You know, once they'd set this going, this was in 2010, and they couldn't get any published accounts. They couldn't get Assange. Apparently, they were accusing Assange of being a one-man band, you know, and they didn't. He wouldn't publish any accounts. He wouldn't tell him where the money had come from, where it was going to, etc. And that I think was why they ended up not actually getting a footing in Iceland, because the people there weren't happy that the organisation was transparent enough for them.
Right. I mentioned earlier, I'm just going to list a few of the characters involved in the board. I mentioned earlier that WikiLeaks was advised by the NED, the National Endowment for Democracy, and the FH, which is the Freedom House, both which have got links to what you might call the New World Order, the Council on Foreign Relations and the CIA.
Yeah.
Now, one person who was on the advisory board of WikiLeaks was Philip Adams. Now, he held Australian governmental media administration posts, and he worked for News Corp, owned by Rupert Murdoch. Let me have a look. Who else? We've got Chinese dissidents and Tiananmen dissidents, but who had links to CIA, were on the board of WikiLeaks. One of them, Liu, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, Ziob Chinese literary critic, writer, professor, and human rights activist who called for political reforms and the end of communism, single-party rule in China. So this is someone who wants to reform China, and this is things that I've heard in various emails that, let's say, states that are considered rogue states are targets of WikiLeaks, or rogue regimes. So if you're going to release dirt on certain regimes, we've heard the word, what's the next stage that follows that? Regime change. So
yeah.
have they been set up to assist the CIA's global plan to regime change any government which they don't like by releasing dirt on those rogue regimes, including China? Another name that I'll just mention is Cass Sunstein, who was an advisor to the Obama administration. He wasn't on the board of WikiLeaks, but he mentioned WikiLeaks in a very early article that he wrote in February 2007, before there'd been any significant releases again. So whether he just plucked that out of the mainstream media, I don't know. Now, this guy has written about conspiracy theories and how their behaviours need to be managed by government and how conspiracy theorists need to have their parties infiltrated and all the rest of it. We need to infiltrate conspiracy groups, this guy has said. So he's mentioned WikiLeaks. We've got another guy called Ben Laurie, who is the former cybersecurity boss of Google, director of the Open Rights Group. Assange asked Laurie for help designing a system to protect leakers' anonymity. Are you really going to go to Google to set up your system? When we know that Google is absolute corporate player, and then the name of George Soros keeps popping up as well, a character who is connected to all of the different New World Order players. Now, another character involved you might want to look up is Daniel Domscheit-Berg, or Daniel Schmidt as he was called. He joined WikiLeaks a year after it was set up,
right,
but then left in 2010, and he's written a book about it, right, which I've downloaded and I started reading it. Computer nerds don't write the best books, right? I don't really want to know what Assange has got in his duffel bag, you know what I mean? So I got a bit bored of that. But he's an odd character to watch videos on and try and figure out, well, if WikiLeaks is a complete intel setup, then this guy who was invited to join Assange, they were kind of a double act for a little while. You can find a lecture that they've given, a joint lecture that they've given. That must mean that he'd have to be in the fold as well, I would have thought. So did he write his own book? You can find videos of him online. So you look at the characters involved, it doesn't fill you with confidence. It doesn't make you think this organisation is what it claims.
No.
All right. So let's now, let's come on to his sort of living situation, right? Because there's some comedy mileage in this. So let's first go to 2009. This is an article which states that Julian Assange was wined and dined at the US Embassy. To the United States, Julian Assange may be public enemy number one. Some American politicians have even called for his execution. Right, so this article's been written at the end of December 2010, but less than a year ago, in December 2009, the founder of WikiLeaks was officially entertained at the US Embassy cocktail party by one of the very diplomats whose secrets he would soon spill to the world. At the reception held at the US Ambassador's residence in Reykjavik, Iceland, Mr. Assange chatted with Sam Watson, the embassy's deputy chief of mission. Assange was already sitting on dozens of Mr. Watson's classified cables at the time of the December party, including embarrassing details about America's and Britain's role following the collapse of Iceland's banks, which were later published to widespread outrage in the local media. So there's also information, I think, that he's leaked on Sarah Palin. Sarah Palin has called for Assange to be hunted down. Right, so he's been invited to US embassies,
right?
And okay, so this is December 2009. So at some point, I don't know the exact date, people can look it up, there was rape allegations from someone in Sweden. Well, not from them, I believe. I think it was from the police. But there's a supposed rape case from Sweden. So he was then in legal difficulties. And there's also some alleged ongoing possible prosecution or stroke investigation from some court in the US, right? So he's kind of in exile and was given a home in the UK by independent video news journalist Vaughan Smith, and his family welcomed Mr. Assange, who created the whistleblowing website, into their home at Ellingham Hall near Bungay between December 2010 and December 2011. So he's living in this posh mansion in East Anglia for a year. Now, it just so happens that Vaughan Smith, whose house he was living in, is the owner of the Frontline Club. Now, the Frontline Club is this sort of elitist media organisation where people in the media get together and talk about certain things. And who helped set that up? George Soros, right? So while he's living in this house, we'll come on to his Ecuadorian embassy residence in a minute after we've done this next bit.